Custom airports are here now in City Skylines too. I think it's safe to say most folks aren't too keen on using the vanilla international airport, and now you don't have to. I'll show you how to make something like this. It might look like there's a lot going on, but the good news is everything you need is available on PDX mods. I'll break down as much as I can, and hopefully we'll give you a decent starting point if you want to try it yourself. Before we get into it, I'm going to catch up with some district naming in the city. All of these areas are named after supporters on Patreon or YouTube, past and present. I've been slacking a bit on this, so it does feel good to show a little bit of overdue recognition to those folks who kindly support the channel every month. It certainly makes a big difference here. And a special shout out to these 4 legends who've been subscribed for over a year. It's incredible support and it's very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much, guys. So to kick things off, we'll just discuss exactly how this is possible now. So it's all due to StarQ's modular service blocks mod. This features in the channel several times since its inception, and I think it's been in every episode basically since it's come out. When you pop the block down, it will give you several upgrades to choose from. So there's a couple of runways, there's cargo stops, passenger stops, cargo storage, and additional workspaces. You might find you have to unlock a few things to get access to them. So when you click on the block, as I said, you can just pick your upgrade of choice. Here I'm just going to stick down a couple of runways just to get things moving. And just to demonstrate things, I'm going to pop down a passenger stop here as well. So here on the runway, you can see that comes with little stubs. You can use them if you want to have your stops quite close to the runway. Here I'm going to use the invisible taxiway, and that's just going to extend the distance that I can have planes stopping from the actual runway itself. You can access the invisible taxiway through the normal transport menu. The routing can be a little bit tricky to get your head around, so what I would suggest is that you just have a little play about with things before you start building the actual airport itself, just to make sure that things do work okay. Essentially what you need to do between one stop at the end of the runway and the other side, you've got to route your outside connection. You can find the outside connection on the very edge of your map. And as long as both ends of the runway are connected with an outside stop in between, then you should be able to route your planes to the stop of your choice. So we've managed to get a complete circuit here. You know it's complete when it says complete route. Now it's just time to wait and see what happens when the planes come down. So you're going to see here that the plane appears that it's stuck on the runway, and you'll find that when they're trying to get on the runway and when they're trying to get off the runway. Now the reason behind that is that they are just simply stopping at the stop that's built in there. So we can go in and take a quick look with Better Bulldozer, and you can see that we have the stops here, and they're normally invisible. You can also get them to show up in dev mode if you want, but I think Better Bulldozer does the job pretty nicely here. So all I did there was just delete the stop, and hopefully when the next plane comes round, it shouldn't get stuck when it's coming off the runway. Now one thing to note about these little stops is that you can add your own, of course, as well, and we saw that in the menu at the beginning. What you will find is if you are routing the planes a little bit further away from the runway, or if you're using the larger runway, you will need to add your own stops for the routing to work. It's the same idea as earlier on. You just simply use the routing tool and you just go from stop to stop, and you can send the planes in whatever direction you need. Perfect. So you can see that one sailed through there, no getting stuck, no stopping, because we deleted the stops. That was just a quick demo to give you a quick idea how things work. There will be a lot more on routing, and we'll also obviously have a look at the cargo stuff, which will come just shortly in the video as well. But for me, at this point, I've got to make sure that the sizing and the orientation of this build is going to work. Airports are, of course, enormous infrastructure projects, and if I crack on and break ground and kind of get all the kind of complicated stuff done that can't really be too easily undone, then we're going to be in a bit of trouble, and we've got pretty limited space to work on. We've chosen to build this on an island, of course, so there's only so much I can do, and because we're right at the edge of the map and we do have a shipping channel right beside us as well, so we can terraform a bit and reclaim a bit of land, but not that much. I do have a pretty good idea of how I want the terminal to look, so I want to have dual runways here. Again, space considerations are one of the main things. Also, I didn't have too much success trying to get more runways on the go. I didn't do any runways crossing, so I can't attest whether or not they work okay. But I did try parallel runways on the on one single side of the airport, and I didn't quite get the routing running the way I wanted. Probably irrelevant anyway. It wasn't going to fit in this build regardless if I wanted to add a third or a fourth runway. I was thinking something like Chicago O'Hare or something like that would have been pretty cool. So I'll maybe revisit it again if I ever do another airport like this, but for this one, I think two runways is going to be plenty, and it's going to take up enormous amounts of space as it is. So after shifting about the runways quite a bit and just making sure I've got enough space, and I think I've got just enough space for the terminal that I want and all the plane routing and all the rest of it, I know that I wanted to have some public transport, baked directly into the build as well. Now the nice thing about the Mediterranean train station is the platforms. They're all built in there. I don't need to mess about. I don't need to build any walkways or any covers or anything like that, but obviously the main building itself isn't going to fit in this big international airport, so we're going to be covering that up a wee bit later on, and I do have some pretty good assets to do that as well. I usually struggle with tunnels, but this one actually went in not too bad at all. So as you've probably noticed already, I'm using these little roads to essentially frame out what we're doing and making sure that everything fits. I definitely want to use invisible taxiways, and we know the size of the stops where the passengers are going to be getting off. So with that in mind, I wanted to have a bit of a horseshoe shaped terminal. I think that will work quite well. It should give us plenty of gates for the planes, and it will give us a bit of building space inside and give us space for that, for that public transport that we want to add as well. The train's going to be the first part of that. I've got a few other ideas to add a few other bits and pieces in, and I want most of the transport methods represented in this build as well. We'll get it hooked up for the rest of the city. With the outline of the airport pretty much set, now it's time to really find out if we've left ourselves enough space to build an airport inside it. So first things first is just to use some of the assets and get one of the levels of the airport done. And I'm going to be using one of the Japanese college add-on buildings to do this. I'm going to be leaning on that Japanese college heavily in this build. I think the frontage of the building is perfect for an airport, and the add-ons pretty much blend in seamlessly as well. So when we have these kind of curved bits, it makes sense to use the smaller ones. If we have some larger parts of the build, and there will be quite a number of them, then we're going to be using the main college asset as well. Bit of recolor, and I think we come up with something that looks fairly close to a modern airport. And I think that's a more than reasonable start, for a modern terminal. Now in the last video on Bali High, I mentioned that I wanted to use these cubes from Crypto Gamer for big infrastructure builds, and I'm finally getting to do it now. Used them plenty in the past, and again, there's just one of these little tools that I kind of wish they were actually in the game. They're really super useful if you want to build a whole load of different stuff. This is going to act as a really nice base, and it means that we can get some nice sort of key walls, so to speak, but we don't need to mess about with networks or anything like that. The other major part of the main airport building itself will also be the cargo and the maintenance depot. I'm going to use some of the park maintenance assets, get them recolored, and then I'm going to try and cover up the windows a little bit. I don't really want them showing, so I use some decals and just lighten things up a little bit. It means that you can't really see them unless you're pretty much bang on right up to it. Also use some of the warehousing, that'll be pretty nice, and you'll probably seen that I noticed that the buildings didn't have quite enough height as I wanted for this type of build. So we're just going to use, again, StarQ's pop-hole assets. We will use Move It to get them up in place and get them on the right height. We'll stack them up so they're a little bit taller and it looks realistically. You could maybe get a plane in there, and then we're going to use some of El Gendo's road decals, and we're going to try and give that impression that this in fact is an open hangar and you can just drive your plane straight in there. So we'll rinse and repeat. We'll do that in quite a few of the buildings. Around the back, we'll add some access and we'll stick some doors on here. Of course, they're not functional at the moment, but with StarQ's service blocks and zoning blocks, we can add functionality and we can put in whatever we want within these buildings. And we will be doing that, of course, as well. I want to get plenty of traffic in here. I've got a few ideas to try and get a little bit of extra traffic into the airport as well, because one of my main complaints about the game is that it's just a little bit dead in terms of vehicle traffic. So there are a few sort of obvious things that I want to get added in the airport. Obviously we wanted a kind of bit of a fuel depot. We're going to need some firefighting facilities on here as well. On the other side of the airport, I wanted to have a little general aviation terminal in its own right. That's where the rich people will come in their private jets. I think it makes sense to use the helicopter facility we've got, the functional one, we can see helicopters coming on and off and taking off and whatnot. But again, we can use recolor and we can kind of customize it a little bit. But a nice easy one, and again, adds a wee bit of life to the build as well. Now, of course, no airport is going to be complete without a tower. Don't really have an asset for that, so I'm going to cobble something together. We'll use a couple of the firefighting ones. We'll use one of the cubes as well, and we'll just decorate it with a few more of the fancy wall assets. I think by Crypto Gamer, if I remember correctly, as well. Plenty of comms up on the roof, I think, would work along with the air conditioning. I'd love to have a proper tower, but it is what it is, and I think we can cobble one together. And it looks kind of passable, at least from a bit of a distance, right? For those gate buildings, I'm going to be using one of the Japanese commercial assets. We're going to use a good number of them. And then for the roof, we've got the one of the water assets, I think, which again is one of the static ploppables. Same as the other buildings that we saw elsewhere on the cargo, for example. Once we get these recolored, they will look the part a little bit better. So all of these had to be done individually, of course. There's no copy and paste, unfortunately, at this point. That mod is broken after the previous patch, and it could have come in really, really useful later on in this build, because there's a lot of stuff that was kind of repetitive, especially once we get to the runways. So when I was looking for inspiration and ideas for the build, I had a few different sources in mind. I had Newark Airport in New York, I used Heathrow in London, and I also used my local airport, Glasgow, as well. And one of the features that I found in Newark was what appears to be light rail that runs kind of underneath the individual terminals. So rather than underneath, I thought, why not run through it, and we'll have a bit of a raised one. Now, I might come back to this when I build out in the next episodes. It looks like, obviously, we're only going to do one large terminal here, but I think we do have scope to potentially maybe hook it up to another part of the city. You'd expect maybe parking zones, but how many people are going to use it realistically? If there's parking zone, especially when there's parking right beside it, it's kind of difficult enough to get people using the damn thing as it is. But nonetheless, I'm just going to do a little short route from one side of the terminal to the other, and it'll be kind of fun to see if anybody uses it. And I am going to be adding plenty of life into this airport. There'll be lots going on. I do, of course, want to see this in action. There's no point hiding it behind, the terminal itself, and I think that's pretty cool. Nice little feature, actually. So I think now it's time to really bulk out the terminal a little bit and get some height and get some, really get some depth to it. As I said earlier on, we're going to be using the college, the Japanese college, and we're essentially just going to use it like Lego, build it up and bulk it out. It will completely transform our Mediterranean, heritage train station completely. We'll be getting rid of all of the nice detailing and nice features on that particular asset. I'm really sorry. It is beautiful, but we are going to be hiding it. It's just not going to fit. And then again, where we need to, we're going to use the extensions, and we'll just block it up and raise them up. One thing I really wanted to try and create was to have a bit of a kind of drop-off area, right at the terminal front door. And one of the challenges on that was getting the Sims to actually use the thing, and again, getting a little bit of life, on that particular section of road. So before I start building out the rest of the assets and the rest of the blocks here, with the college and whatnot, I want to try and get everything hooked up, and I want to give people a reason to use it. So on that little access road you see on the left-hand side, the little alley road, that's going to have a ton of industry that I'm going to be slotting underneath, and that's going to be, functional industry. It's going to be placed down, and we're going to be doubling up with the service blocks a little bit later on as well. And I'd really like people to use the walkway on the top, but that might be a little bit challenged, so we need to see at the end if we can get away with that or not. For the overall wider road network, I do have a few ideas in mind for something that is completely over-engineered and a little bit ridiculous and completely unnecessary. It won't make this episode, I don't have the time for it, but I reckon that'll probably come later on in the week. So keep an eye out for that. So now we can see where these cubes have come into play. They've really given us a base for, our parking here. I am going to use some of the invisible path networks. I don't know how much, use it's realistically going to get, but we can hook up the parking, directly to it. So if anybody's coming out the parking, heading to the airport, or any of the commercial industry that we're going to be hiding within that airport, then hopefully they'll be using that path. So here I'm going to add the first of the functional buildings within that little service road, which we are going to hide. And here some of the Japanese commercial assets are going to be coming in really handy. And I can see that I'm putting them in the wrong place. They need to be in front of the road, so let's get them readjusted. But again, once we've got them recolored, they should be a little bit of a better fit. And again, we can add a few extra floors by repeating the college asset once more. I went ahead and added a bit of parking here. I'm just going to be using vanilla parking. It fits perfectly. We're going to have some access roads running either side of it. So one elevated, of course, and one at ground level. That'll give us some access to work with, and we can spend a bit of time on that later. So let's have a quick look. You'll notice that this guy is taking the long way round just to access a building within the airport itself. That is very much by design. As I said earlier on, I want traffic in this development, and a good way of doing it is getting them to go around the buildings twice. So they have to go right the way around the one-way system into the building on the left-hand side, and then if they want to come out, they'll come out on the right, and again they have to go around the one-way system to leave the airport development as well. So if it ever gets too busy, which I don't think it will, we can always reverse that, and we can give them some alternative access routes. So let's just get the last few bits and pieces finished off here on the main terminal, and then we can move on to some public transport and get that hooked up. I would say that's probably about 90% of the actual main terminal building done. I think now it's time to set up the transport links, and obviously here what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hooking up the train, and it gives us a nice opportunity to get an extra train station in the city as well. So I'm going to hook this up to our main central station. We'll just do the normal line routing from A to B and back again, and hopefully we should get the trains running on here pretty shortly. I've been talking about a big transit episode, and again, every time I hook something up, it reminds me that it still needs to be done. So I think perhaps maybe in the next few weeks we'll be having a look at that again. So where we have this little space outside the terminal, I'm going to create a bit of a bus station, and on the opposite side, I'm going to create a bit of a taxi rank as well. But checking in our train station here, we can see we are getting our first passengers. Happy days. Well, at least we know that's working. Another thing we've got working is our walkway. Nice to see that our Sims are actually using that now, right? So where we have our taxi rank, I think it makes sense to add a little bit of a taxi depot here. I think we've definitely got scope for a second depot, perhaps a little bit further away from the terminal itself. I think the small one's a good fit, and it uses up a bit of real estate, you know, close to the terminal, and a little bit further away. I think it's a good excuse to actually use up a larger bit of land, and they should complement each other quite nicely. Now, as I'm playing with notifications off, I kinda didn't realise that this actually wasn't hooked up, so I'm just gonna replace a little bit of that highway road with a one-way alley, and then obviously hook up to some electricity and water, and that should give us a steady flow of traffic. We get people starting to use the little invisible walkway that we have around the back of the parking as well. That is very nice to see, I must admit. And we got a little bit of an issue with the water here. For some reason it disappeared, so hadn't come across that before. It did happen once or twice as I was building on the episode today, and in the end, to resolve it, I just went in dev mode, and I think I hit reset the water. For some reason I couldn't change the sim speed any longer in the water though, so not too sure what's going on there, but not really a big deal unless I'm messing about with the water features, I guess. So obviously down at that front of the airport, we've got things surfaced up. Going to add some props, and again we're going to kind of do the same idea on the other side as well, but we'll add a little bit of colour, and then we'll get some shelter from the elements once we have these bits and pieces in place. Once we've got them surfaces, it does make quite a big difference, doesn't it, to the overall look, and it's going to give us some nice development areas as well. Must admit, I do really enjoy the surfaces here by Generic Lemons. This is the pavement one, I think, or I can't remember if it's called sidewalk or pavement, but either way, really nice addition. So we'll get the buses hooked up, and talking about buses, this is our other bus station, so we're going to have to clear this at some point. I think the influx of taxis is having a bit of an impact on the bus routes. So that big gap that we have on the right hand side of the terminal, just behind the taxiways, I'm going to be using that for some security. We're going to be adding plenty of police coverage on here. And again, we'll use a recolouring, we'll get it nice and white, which I think will be a better fit. And then we'll change out all of the surfaces that we have on here as well. What I do want to do with this particular asset is to extend it out a little bit. And by that, what I'm going to do is, again, use some of StarQ's service blocks. So I'm going to use the main block, I'm going to chuck it on there, and then we're going to use the upgrades, and we're going to use it to get some functional additional parking for this particular facility. And we've got it slap bang beside an airport terminal, so we don't really need really any of the additional trees or whatnot. Certainly the big ones, we'll get rid of all of them. On the opposite side of the terminal, again, we have a fairly similar space that we need to fill here as well. And I think perhaps having a terminal car rental place would probably be a nice addition here as well. So we'll give some access from the main terminal. We're gonna just get an asset and just peek the front out at the entrance there. Give it some branding, and then we'll get some cars and vans and all sorts of stuff added on here, and it should be a pretty good fit, I reckon. I think in any future episodes, we've got tons of space, of course, around the front of the airport and behind it, and we'll probably need to build a tunnel going underneath right enough to get access. But I think we've got plenty of scope for, warehouses and hotels and car rental places and all sorts of stuff a little bit later on in the series. So we'll get those shelters in place that I spoke about for the bus station here, and we'll also swing back over and we'll get the shelters in place for the taxi stops as well. And they're quite high, really, aren't they? So once they're in place, when we move it, shuffle them down a little bit. I think that's certainly a bit of a better fit. And as usual, these things take quite a bit of time just to get just right. I did try to shift it in place but move it. Didn't quite get the heights right, but again, a little bit of individual selection and change, and then we can get them looking just the part. And there we go. Those car parks, filled them up with cars, changed the surfaces, and that certainly looks a bit more like it now, doesn't it? So I know now that everything that I want to build within the confines of the horseshoe shape, of the terminal, I know that everything's going to fit. Anything else that we need to build is off screen, towards the bottom of the screen there, and we have plenty of space, there's no confines really. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be adding on the passenger stops. Now we have a few choices here. We could use all of the passenger stops, but what I decided to do was just have some of the spaces reserved for parking, and then have some of them for active gates, active stops, if you like. I didn't want to go overboard and then find that the airport is just crammed, full of planes. But StarQ says that there shouldn't be any issues, using them all, and you can, of course, just change the amount of planes that are on each route as well. So here we're just adding the invisible taxi bays, and then I'm going to be adding stops as and when we need them. And let's try and get our first route hooked up. So this is just the same as we saw at the beginning of the video. And here you can see that I'm using an additional stop, so I can bring it in just offset from the final gate position, route it back, complete the route, and we should get a couple of routes on the go there. I'm just going to rinse and repeat, and we'll get quite a few of these done. You can see now that we've got the planes queuing. That is expected. Again, as we said at the beginning, we have a stop here that we will need to remove. I'm not going to remove it now because we're not done, and we still want to add some cargo planes as well. So we're going to bring up the upgrade menu here, and here I'm just going to be placing the actual cargo stops. So this is where we're going to be ending their journey and where they're going to deposit their cargo. The cargo will basically get teleported to this little thing over here, and that's the cargo storage that you can access from the same menu. Cargo storage will need road access, and once that road access is granted, you'll see that there'll be plenty of trucks come into play, and the trucks will go directly to the cargo storage. Cargo storage, you can just hide that in that ploppable building, for example, and again, that's exactly what I'll be doing in just a minute or two. So here you see me just finishing off the last of the cargo routes, and I'm only going to do the 3 here. Now that I'm pretty happy with the routes, I think that is everything running off this runway. I'm just going to go in with better bulldozer, and we're going to delete those little stops that are on the runway. Remember, these things are necessary for routing, but they will hold things up unless you go and delete them. Do be careful what you're deleting. Some of them appear to be standalone, and some of them are basically baked into the runway as well. So you might need slightly different settings on your Better Bulldozer when you're going to go and delete it. Just make sure you're deleting the right thing. If you do delete it and decide that actually you've made a mistake and you need them back, you can regrow them using the Better Bulldozer facility here. So before moving on, I think it's time to just check and make sure that everything is working. So at the end of each runway, everything seems to be running okay. We don't have anybody stopping and holding up traffic. We can get rid of some of the props that we're not going to be using here. And again, we can just check them individually, just make sure that they're all stopping in the right place and that we have routes on all of the actual stops that we want them to be depositing the passengers on. And I think we're looking okay here. So swinging over to the other side of the terminal, I've just gone ahead and put the routes in already. What I want to do is to try and customize the individual gates a little bit. I think over there we can give a little bit of identity by giving certain colors, and we'll change the routes, and then we can change individually the planes as well. Now, even with the planes that are moving, you will find that they'll come and go, of course, and every time they land, just hit them, recolor them, and you can just copy and paste the colors from the props, for example. It'll be nice and easy. And eventually what you'll find is that once they come back in, the ones that you've colored will be kind of recycled. You know, they'll come in and they'll land with the colors that you want as well, which is kind of nice. Now, whether or not that carries on in infinity, I don't know, but it seemed to be working okay with me. So again, we'll just take a quick minute and just make sure that everything is working as we should. I think it's looking okay. Up top here, I wasn't really getting much action, so I thought we'll try and stick a couple of taxi ranks up here, and we'll send a bus or two up as well, and we'll see what happens. It's actually kind of running out of buses, so decided to plop a depot down here as well, and I think having that by an airport's not a terrible shout. And eventually we did start to get a little bit more action, so I was happy with that. So now we're moving on to the groundwork, which will include the runway itself, the taxiways, and the main airport apron. I'm going to still rely on the grid that we had, or the frame that we had, you know, from the beginning. We can get rid of the inner one, and now we can use a bit of an outer frame, if you like, as well. I'm going to trace around the routes that the planes are taking and just make sure that we do have some nice straight lines. And again, we just use the snapping and use some of the angles that we have is here as well, and be nice and consistent. I'm also going to be using net lanes and the parallel tool. That's going to give me some really nice outlines that I can use to fill up with surfaces, and we're using them on the runway as well as the taxis. The runway, you can see, it is pretty thick, it's pretty wide, and it's a little bit too much, and I definitely want to sort of try and pare that back and really go for a little bit more of a realistic width on that part of the airport. I think it looks a little bit strange as it stands. There is an airport details pack out on PDX mods, and it did come in useful, but for the taxiway markings, I'm just going to use one of Algendo's yellow lines, the thick one. It looked pretty good, and again, we'll try and get it kind of uniform as we can as we come off the taxiways and onto the additional taxiways or the parkings or the gates or whatever. Again, I'm kind of leaning on real life for the layouts on here, and those three airports come in pretty useful. We just have a look at them on Google Maps and try and figure out what we need to do. Might not be exactly perfect, but I think the end result was not too far off the real thing. With that gap between the taxiway and the runway, I thought using the path would be a pretty good idea. It would be nice and easy to try and fill it, but because the actual runway itself is a network, it's given us that elevated one, which was not going to work. So I decided to just mark it out with the net lanes. Now we're going to use some of Sully's vanilla grass decals, which are super useful. Again, I use them in most of the city builds now, and that is going to basically get rid of the thickness on the runway. Really useful. It take quite a bit of time because, of course, I wanted it looking nice and smooth on the corners, and then we kind of trace it around with the individual decals. But really nice effect, and I think it was one of them ones that take a fair bit of time, but 100% worth doing. And here you see the difference between the kind of curved corners and just leaving them as is. If you check out the thickness in the main runway itself, you can see that that is pretty vast, isn't it? Now we will have an opportunity to thin out that runway on the outer edge as well, again just using the same decals, and we'll kind of narrow that right down. But now you can see, just with a bit of surface work, things are looking like a bit more like an airport, aren't they? So those little markers that we used, we can just bring them back with Move It, or we can delete it, whatever works. You'll see that I've gone ahead and applied those decals on the outside of the runway there, and that is definitely looking a bit more appropriate from a proportion point of view, isn't it? But I'll leave these things up so you can have a little look at how I went about doing it. Again, if you need to, you can always pause it, take a screenshot if need be. One thing I did do is go back and add the pedestrian stuff to the trams. I'll just quickly show you. It looks like a bit of a shambles, but anybody over there can take it from one side of the airport to the other. I can't quite believe I condensed that section in 3 minutes. It took hours, believe me. What's up next then is the runway holding position. So that's basically where the planes will stop and they'll ask for permission to enter the runway. Now, as we get onto the actual main runway itself, we're going to be adding the threshold markings, the designation markings, which is the numbers that you see on the runway, touchdown zone, aiming point, side stripes we've got in place already, and a bit of a center line, which I didn't actually bother too much with, to be honest. Now, one thing that we don't have in that decal pack, unfortunately, are these particular markings. So I'm going to get creative and I am going to use my own. So what I decided to do with all of these really was to just draw our white rectangle so we can have some pretty consistent borders with it, and then we just cover it up with some of El Gendo's road markings. Not perfect when you get right up close, but it's best I can do with what we got. This section will be the displaced threshold, so we're going to have some arrows pointing, which is what you'll see in real life. And guys, a tip for you, if you struggle with the layout of an airport, jump onto chartfox.org. Tons and tons of airport layouts on there. It's free, you do need to register, but once you're on, you can check out whatever airport you want. So I use that for Flight Sim, and it came in pretty useful when I was looking for layouts at the beginning of the video. Combine that with Google Maps, of course, and you can get tons and tons of ideas. So one thing you won't be short of when you're doing airport builds is inspiration, I can promise you that. So as I said earlier, we're just going to use El Gendo's road marking tools, and it's a pretty good match to the actual surface that we're using here. So no complaints, I must admit. For the arrows that we've seen, they're a bit small, would prefer to be them a little bit bigger, at the end of the runway. But at the end of the day, you can either draw them yourself, or you can just use the ones if you think they're acceptable. So as you see a little bit of differentiation with the colours, but I don't actually mind that. I want to have things looking a little bit more natural and a little bit different, and it kind of gives the impression it's maybe a little bit worn, and it's a little bit more like perhaps what you would see, kind of patchy in a real airport. So if we take a step back, you can see the difference in the colours between some of the taxis and some of the runways and whatnot, and I'm going to go and add a little bit of that onto the main concourse now. I'll quickly add that little bit of contrast, we'll stick a few markings down here, and then we'll get on to the next bit. So one thing I would definitely recommend if you are building your own is getting onto Google Maps and just seeing just exactly how many service support vehicles there are on the airports. Obviously, I've been at an airport a few times in my life and I am aware of what you'll find there, but I was really surprised with just the sheer volume that you see on Google Maps. So I definitely wanted that shown on this build. We're going to be adding an absolute ton of them later on, but before we get onto that, I wanted to add the sky bridges that you'll find in pretty much every major airport. So remember, the way that the blocks work is that there's just individual little add-ons. They don't require, pedestrian networks to attach them. So here we can have this. This is just purely for decoration, but it would look weird without them. I'm going to use some of the tram props, and then we'll use the forest harvester, and that can be the wheels underneath. And for some reason, the plane here didn't want to sort of stick its nose beside the terminal. So what I decided to do was just send a couple of bendy buses, and then we'll give it a reason for the bendy buses. So it looks like we've had a little bit of a disaster, and we'll make that a little bit of a scene. Now, I have to admit, that's probably one of the last things you want to see if you're heading off a plane, right? So let's get plenty more of these vehicles put in place, then we'll have a little chat about some of these runway markings. So on the runway hold stop position, you'll normally have a little red sign here directly on the runway itself. It wouldn't say ILS, it would normally have the number of the runway, or the numbers of the runway on it. I thought initially when I was making this video that I was just going to have to accept that I would just need to use the ILS ones, because at least it looks the part when you can zoom out a little bit. But I still wanted the ILS ones as well. So the ILS ones are basically put in place where you would have a larger aircraft, and they will be instructed by air traffic control to stop at the ILS marking rather than the runway marking that you can see here on the screen. And that's to prevent messing with the signal from the ILS machinery. The ILS stands for Instrument Landing System, and that is basically the system that sees your passenger jet be able to land in bad weather. And typically you'll get a 3% slope, and you'll get a nice safe landing. So these ILS markings are usually a little bit further back from the runway ones, and again, they might or might not be asked to stop to prevent blocking the signal. So I do have a solution to show you guys at the very end of the video. It's a quick last minute addition, but we can get the runway markings just the way that, which is great because it's the kind of thing that would keep me up at night. It would drive me bananas if sometimes it's just those small details that you really want to change. As I said, it's just because there are no numbers on that airport pack, so it's pretty limited, and it's the same when we get to markings on the taxiways as well. Again, there's no numbers that you can put down to designate, for the pilots. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the runway. So this is runway A. So we're just going to kind of designate that on the actual concourse itself. Runway B is the one that connects the two main ones together. And then once we get around the corner, we're on to taxiway C, not runway. One thing we do have numbers for though is to put down the designation of the gates. So I'm going to use the cargo as 00 numbers. We'll use the first terminal on the A taxiway as the numbers beginning with 1, and then vice versa as we go around the other taxiways. So B will start with 2 and C will start with 3. So I reckon what we'll do now is we'll get another little bit of detailing down here. We'll get some of the markings done, and we'll get some of the groundwork done, and then what we can do is we can move on to some of the runway lights. And it does look good at night as well, so you definitely want to see that. So one of the main challenges of getting the lights done is just lining them up and making sure that they're straight. So what I would definitely recommend for you guys, if you are doing it yourself, is again just to create a frame and use it as a point of reference that you can use to draw out what you need to draw out. I decided to use the red lights that we have, and I think this is part of the extra light mod by CryptoGamer. I could be wrong, I don't have the information in front of me, but I decided to just draw them out as lines and then just delete the ones that we don't need. And I think that gave a pretty good result. It's pretty straightforward. Again, we can just use the filter on Better Bulldozer and just make sure that we don't delete any of the surfaces or any of the netlines. But what I'll be doing here is I'll be sinking them into the ground. And I know obviously on rail airports a lot of the lights are elevated as well, certainly on approach, but for this I think it looked a little bit better being sunken in. And I'm going to be doing the same with these little park lights. So we'll just extend it right the way down, past the end of the runway and onto the grass. At the very bottom of this little development here, we're also going to be adding some of the ILS equipment as well. So again, instrument landing system, we're just going to use some TV aerials, and then we're just going to recolour them yellow, which does look the part. At the end of the runway, you will have threshold lights. Now the threshold lights will either be green or they will be red, depending on which runway is in use. So here I'm actually going to be using I think this is the only custom asset that we have, or local asset that I'm going to be using. This I used in the Tarumi Junction build. This is part of the kind of traffic lights that we have on the toll road. And to be honest, you can't really see them unless you're right up against them. So I think realistically, if you like messing about with the editor, maybe use the park lights, turn them green, sync them, and they would probably give you a better result on the threshold lights. Yeah, there we go. You can really only see them when you're right up against them. Now I am going to add the ILS equipment at the end of each of the runways, but I'm not going to add the lights at the other end. Obviously, at night time, you're not going to have them both lit up, on approach, because planes won't be doing that. You're only going to have one active runway on each side, depending on the wind. So all we need to do here is just add that extra little bit lighting. There's a threshold lighting there. I also added some pappy lighting as well. Pappy lighting is the little ones, the little red ones that you'll see at the edge of the runway. Now the reason why the 4 of them are red is that the approach in Skylines or the planes coming into the airport is absolutely wild. It looks like it's like 20 degrees or something. So I'm going to assume that those pappy lights are just constantly red. Usually you'd have 2 whites and 2 reds, and that just means that you're coming directly bang on the glide scope. Remember, glide scope we said was usually 3%, and that's kind of standard. Some airports you'll get a little bit more, like City of London for example is 5.5% if I remember correctly, and that's a super steep descent. But as I said, have a look at the dive bombing in the Skyline planes, and I reckon it's probably about 20%. So those pappies are definitely just going to be staying permanently red. So now we can get stuck into the final detailing and bring everything together. In this section, what we're going to be doing is a bit of light groundwork. We're going to expand the police station using the same techniques as we did previously. We've got the gap between the highway that we're going to be filling up with some office development. We've got plenty of parking still to go and plenty of resurfacing as well. I do want to add some very basic landscaping and generally do a little bit of a tidy up. And of course the cargo terminal, we haven't really done an awful lot over there, so we've really got that still to build out. So I'm going to chuck that in the detailing section because there's a lot of prop work involved in that one. I do want to make it all functional, so tons of functionality with the zoned blocks and some service blocks, and we're going to create a little construction site. Now that might disappear in future episodes, but we'll see what happens. There's also still a lot to add over on the cargo apron as well, and plenty of vehicles that we need dotted around the airport as well. So if you like a bit of detailing, you'll enjoy this section, and then we're going to come back and we'll be able to solve that problem we were having with the ILS marking. The mod that we're going to be using for that pretty much has unlimited customizability, so I think you guys will be interested in seeing that, and we will pick that up in just a few minutes once we've got the main detailing done. So let's get these airport markings sorted out then. So if you can cast your mind back, what I'm looking to do is to add numbers here. There are no numbers included in the airport markings mod, and also the other ones that we have, which are Tagons, which I think was City Rats, and then published by Tagon. They don't have the draw order for it. Now, the thing is that they're a little bit small as well, so they really wouldn't have looked the part. So the solution for this is going to be a mod called Red Everywhere. Now, as luck would have it, I was on Booty Addict's stream on Twitch, and if you don't know who Booty Addict is, go and give him a follow. He does some amazing detailed builds, and I'll leave the link in the description if you want to check him out. But he gave me a hand getting this thing up and running, and essentially what you can do is you can use your own images, and for this I'm just going to use an image of some letters and some numbers, and then you can kind of put them in place using the mod here and resize them, and you can basically use this for anything: text, images, whatever you want. You can put them on flat ground, you can put them on buildings, you can put them on moving vehicles. And for a bit of fun, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing once I've got these runways sorted out. So this one's going to show 9 right because that's the only runway that you can get access to from the side. These taxiways in the middle of the runway, you can actually access both, so we're going to be marking that accordingly. And what you will notice is you can save the creation and then apply them directly onto another object. So it saves you having to reload them every single time. Now for this to work in my scenario, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to grab the ILS decal, just slot that in behind the letters, and then we'll use that little red decal, and then we'll basically cover up the letters that we have in the ILS lettering. Now of course, if I wasn't using that particular pack from PDX mods, you could probably just create the whole thing. You know, the red and background and the white lettering, have that as a PNG, put it in the folder, and then import it in-game. So this being the first time I've used the mod, I wanted to try a few little things out while I had the game open, and I thought perhaps maybe we can actually make our own little airline. So I imported the logo from the channel, and I thought that would look pretty good if we can get it on the tail of the plane. I have to admit the transformation stuff with the rotation and the editing planes and all that kind of stuff, it does take a little bit of getting used to, a little bit of back and forth, not gonna lie. But you can absolutely fine tune exactly where you want these things. So once we got the positioning just right, it was time to make it a little bit bigger. It looks a bit small obviously, doesn't it? And I think we want most of the tail taken up with that. We'll get that saved as a template as well, and then we can apply it on the rest of the planes that are dotted around the place. So after letting things run on a little bit, we've got this plane that's going to come into land, and you can see that it is coming in with the logo on it. Now I have to say the logo does look a little bit redder, so I'm not too sure if I've done something different with the colouring there, but nonetheless, they're coming back into the map and they've got it on the right hand side. Hopefully once we turn around at the end of the runway, it will also be on the left hand side with a little bit of luck. Perfect, there we go. And we've got all of our markings in the right place now as well, which is great, so happy days. So let's take a closer look at that area that we filled in at the end through the detailing time lapse. I think from this shot you can kind of tell the scope of the actual build itself and really just how far away it is from the main terminal building. It's quite a substantial build really, isn't it? Mixing the functional stuff, I think that was the bus station there, knowing with the different props and whatnot, I think it worked out pretty well. Fairly basic construction site there. As I say, I might or might not redevelop that one, not made my mind up on that yet, and I definitely wanted to go back and have a quick look at this descent into the airport, and that is an absolute nosedive, isn't it? Can you imagine being a passenger on that? It'd be absolutely terrifying, wouldn't it? Now I am curious what I might do is I might go back in the game and brush off the old trigonometry skills and try and work out exactly what that rate of descent is. I'd be quite interested to find out actually. So I think I'm pretty happy with the roads the way that they are. Again, lots of scope to add to this in the next episode. I've got something planned which should be good if you guys like a little bit of road spaghetti. It should be a fun build. It should be a challenging build actually as well. So it might be quite a difficult one to pull off actually. But I enjoy a challenge, and that one should be right up my street obviously. I think the big security area, you know, the police stations here that we have, it's actually probably one of the favourite parts of my build, you know, that's not linked to the aviation directly. And I think that alone is a good example of how we can really just sort of double up with the services using StarQ's service blocks. While we're at it, let's take a little first-person view around the airport. We'll do that with one of the police cars as well. And I wish there weren't so many people on the road there actually, so I'm going to have to look and maybe try and give them some alternative pathing that we can perhaps convince them to get off the road and onto some pedestrian lanes instead. That's just a quick whistle-stop tour around the terminal and into the sort of cargo area now. As we take a closer look at the terminals and the main concourse and all the bits and pieces that we've added along there, I should note that anybody who's downloading the game on Patreon, just bear in mind the stuff that we've put on there with the Right Everywhere mod, that won't be on the game save, obviously everything else will. I did think about putting gate markings on the ground, you know, to kind of match up with the individual gates. That would have taken, I think we've got 44 gates there, so I had to make 44 PNGs. And then go and find exactly how I am going to put them on the ground. And frankly, it was just out of scope a bit, you know. It had taken several hours, I think, so not worth it in my opinion for what I want to spend on the build. So I think on review, I think it could have been a little bit bolder and added maybe a few more functional parking spots. But that said, I think we've got a pretty good mix. There's plenty going on when you have a look at the overall activity on the airport, and I'll give you a little time lapse just at the very end just to give you an idea of what I mean. Again, I didn't want to kind of overcrowd it and have too much going on, and it looked maybe just a little bit too busy, you know. However, that said, this is the kind of build that you could probably spend months on, realistically, you know, with Airport 1, putting in, you know, little micro details and all the rest of it. And as always, I try and balance things and try and get videos out at sort of fairly regular pace. So I think I found a good balance on this one, and it was a really fun build actually, really enjoyed it. I also have a small win to report as well. That raised walkway going over the terminal, we have 1 and we have 2 people using it. Absolute dynamite, love that. So the plan of action for the next couple of episodes then is obviously we need to add a bit of spaghetti. It is an airport. Somebody suggested making the interchange at Newark. That was really when I started my channel. I nearly had a fit when I saw it, but and I'm still not going to attempt it now either, but we are going to get something nice and complicated and overly complex, which I think should fit the bill here quite nicely. I think we have scope there on the other end of the airport to maybe extend it. We could get a second cargo terminal in there potentially. I think that would be easy enough to do, and I think we've got plenty of industry to go around here, hotels and all that kind of stuff, which should be pretty cool to build. We saw a lot of service blocks being used in this build. If we didn't use them, along with the creative traffic routing, I reckon the build would look considerably quieter. So if you're interested in seeing more examples of how to creatively use these blocks, check out this video where I create a Formula 1 headquarters right here on the same map.